Daniel Reed looked like the kind of man no one would ever suspect. Steady job, friendly smile, the perfect neighbor on a quiet street. But behind that calm, polite face was a secret life built on lies, theft, and one terrible mistake that would destroy everything he'd worked for. The night he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror wasn't just the end of his double life, it was the moment he knew he had messed up. Daniel Reed had always been the kind of man people trusted without question. In the small, peaceful town of Willow Creek, he was known for his steady smile and helpful nature. He lived in a modest yellow house on Pine Street, with a neatly trimmed lawn and flower beds that were always in perfect shape. On weekends, neighbors would often see him washing his car or helping the elderly couple next door carry their groceries. He wasn't married, didn't have children, and kept mostly to himself, but nobody thought much of it. He was just Daniel, the friendly mechanic who minded his business and never caused any trouble. What no one knew was that Daniel's life wasn't as simple as it appeared. Behind the clean image was a man struggling with quiet desperation. A few years earlier, his small auto repair business had started to fail. Bills piled up, customers stopped coming, and debts began to choke him. He told no one about it, pretending everything was fine. The last thing he wanted was pity or gossip. He smiled through the struggle, fixing cars by day and lying awake at night, wondering how to get out of the hole he was sinking into. Then, one night, as he was locking up his shop, he noticed an expensive set of tools left outside by a delivery driver. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at them. They weren't his, but they could be sold easily. No one would notice, he told himself. No one would get hurt. That night, Daniel made a choice that would quietly change his life forever. He took the tools, sold them the next day, and felt an unfamiliar sense of relief when he held the money in his hands. It felt wrong, but it worked, and once he realized how easy it was, it became harder to stop. At first, he told himself it was just temporary, just enough to clear his debts. He stole things that were small, replaceable, and easy to hide: car parts, electronics, tools, even lawn equipment from sheds left unlocked. He knew exactly how to avoid suspicion. After all, who would suspect the friendly neighborhood mechanic? He was the one people came to when things went missing. They'd ask if he'd heard anything, and he'd shake his head sympathetically, promising to keep an eye out. For nearly a year, Daniel's double life went unnoticed. The local police were frustrated by the string of small thefts around town, but they had no leads. Nothing ever connected the crimes. The thief seemed careful, almost invisible. Meanwhile, Daniel's debts disappeared, and he even started saving money again. The sense of control he'd lost slowly returned. He felt clever, even proud, as if he had beaten the system. But deep down, he knew what he was doing couldn't last forever. Every time he drove out to the edge of town to stash stolen goods near the old quarry, a part of him wondered when it would all catch up to him. Still, he kept going, convincing himself that he was too smart to get caught. Then came the night everything began to unravel. A new gas station attendant, Terry Collins, noticed Daniel's car parked near the quarry at an odd hour. He didn't think much of it at first, but something about it seemed off. Terry mentioned it to a coworker the next morning. That simple observation, made in passing, would become the first crack in the perfect mask Daniel Reed had built for himself. Daniel had always been careful, maybe too careful. Every move he made was planned to the smallest detail. He knew which streets didn't have security cameras, which houses were left unattended, and even when patrol cars passed by certain areas, he was proud of how organized he was. He didn't take risks, he didn't make mistakes. Until that one night when everything went wrong. It started like any other job. He had a beer waiting for a stolen motorcycle, a clean-looking man who'd contacted him through a mutual acquaintance. The deal was simple. Daniel would deliver the bike near the old quarry, the beer would leave cash in a bag behind a stack of concrete blocks, and they'd never have to see each other again. It was late, quiet, and the moonlight stretched long shadows over the dirt road. Daniel arrived early, as always, and waited in the driver's seat with the engine off, his headlights dimmed. He didn't know that Terry Collins, the gas station worker, had spotted his car there a few times before. Terry had a habit of noting license plates when things seemed odd, and that night his curiosity got the better of him. He called the non-emergency police line to report a suspicious vehicle parked by the quarry. It wasn't a big deal, but it was enough to send a patrol car out to check. While Daniel waited for the beer, the minutes dragged. The wind was still, the night to quiet. He stepped out of his car, checked his watch, and rolled the motorcycle a little closer to the meeting spot. The beer was late, he frowned, tapping his foot impatiently. Maybe the man got cold feet. Maybe he'd come later. But something didn't feel right. In the distance, faintly, he saw the glow of headlights approaching. At first, he thought it might be the beer, but the lights were higher off the ground, too high for a regular car. They were police lights. Panic hit him like a wave. His heart raced as he tried to think fast. He shoved the motorcycle behind some bushes and sprinted back to his car. If he could get out before they saw him, maybe he could still fix this. But when he started the engine and tried to reverse, the back tires spun helplessly in the mud. The recent rain had softened the ground near the quarry, and his car sank deeper each time he pressed the gas. The noise was too loud, the panic too sharp. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, breathing hard, listening as the sirens grew louder. He made a desperate choice. He grabbed his jacket, jumped out of the car, and ran toward the woods. Branches whipped at his face as he stumbled through the dark. Behind him, the sound of engines and radios echoed through the night. He didn't dare look back. All he could think about was getting as far away as possible. When the police reached the quarry, they found his car abandoned with the keys still in the ignition. Inside were things Daniel hadn't meant to leave behind: his wallet, his mechanic's ID card, and a few receipts with his name printed clearly across the top. There was no doubt who the car belonged to. They searched the area but found no sign of him. By dawn, news had spread through Willow Creek that Daniel Reed's car was at the center of a police investigation. Neighbors whispered over fences, confused and shocked. The friendly mechanic had vanished overnight, leaving behind a trail of questions and a car full of evidence. Daniel, meanwhile, hid deep in the forest, exhausted and cold, replaying the night in his head. He tried to convince himself that maybe he could still fix it, that he could come back and explain everything somehow. But he knew better. Somewhere inside him, a quiet realization began to sink in. This time, he had really messed up. By sunrise, Daniel was miles from the quarry, stumbling through the woods with his clothes soaked from dew and mud. He had no real plan, just a growing sense of dread pressing on his chest. Every sound in the forest made him flinch. The rustle of branches sounded like footsteps. The whine through the trees felt like whispers calling his name. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and his mind raced through what might be happening back in town. He knew the police would find his car. They would find his wallet. They would find everything. The neat, careful world he had built for years was collapsing faster than he could think. In Willow Creek, the police were busy piecing things together. Detectives searched his small yellow house, expecting to find a clue about where he might have gone. What they found instead was a shock. Behind the wall of his garage, hidden behind a false panel, were rows of stolen items stacked neatly in plastic bins. Each item was labeled and dated, as if part of some twisted inventory. Power tools, watches, electronics, even a few pieces of jewelry from old burglary reports all there. The officers realized quickly that Daniel Reed wasn't just involved in a single theft. He was the thief they'd been chasing for over a year. The discovery changed everything. What had seemed like a simple missing person case was now a full criminal investigation. News spread quickly, and soon the quiet town buzzed with disbelief. People who once waved to Daniel every morning now avoided even saying his name. Reporters came to Willow Creek, filming the yellow house on Pine Street and interviewing shocked neighbors. To them, Daniel had been the model of kindness and reliability. The idea that he'd been behind the town as unsolved crimes didn't seem real. Meanwhile, Daniel moved through the outskirts of town like a shadow. He slept in an old hunting cabin he'd stumbled upon miles from the nearest road. There was no electricity, just a rusted stove and a pile of firewood. He found some canned food in a cupboard and decided to stay there for a while, at least until the police stopped searching. Every night he sat by the window, watching for headlights, his mind racing through ways to escape the mess he had created. He thought about crossing state lines, maybe heading south where no one knew his name. But he had no money, no car, and his face was probably on the news by now. The small amount of cash in his pocket wouldn't last long. He realized he couldn't hide forever, so he started thinking about what to do next. He needed supplies, clothes, and food. To get them, he'd have to risk going back closer to town. The police, however, were one step ahead. They had found security footage from a gas station outside Willow Creek that showed Daniel's car the night he vanished. They used that lead to narrow their search area. For days, teams of officers combed through the forests, checking every abandoned cabin and campsite. Helicopters circled above, and roadblocks were set up on all exits leading out of town. 3 days passed before they reached the edge of the forest where Daniel had been hiding. When he heard the distant hum of helicopters, his heart sank. He packed what little he had into a backpack and slipped out the back of the cabin before the police arrived. When officers finally entered, all they found was a cold fire and a single empty can on the floor. Daniel was still free, but he could feel time closing in on him. Every direction he turned seemed to end in a wall. His once careful mind, so precise and calculated, now scrambled for any idea that might buy him another day. He was no longer the calm neighbor from Pine Street. He was a hunted man, running out of luck and places to hide. The 4th night after Daniel fled, the cabin was colder than usual. The wind carried the smell of rain, and the clouds hung low, threatening a storm. He had been walking for hours along back roads and dirt paths, moving mostly under the cover of darkness. His shoes were torn, his clothes stiff with mud, and his stomach ached from hunger. Every house he passed looked warm and safe, but he couldn't risk being seen. He knew the police were still searching. He had overheard a radio in an abandoned barn earlier that day. His name was everywhere. Daniel decided he had to go back into town. It was reckless, but he was running out of options. He knew there was an old friend, Mark Jensen, who owned a small auto repair garage on the edge of Willow Creek. They hadn't spoken in months, but Daniel had worked there before opening his own shop. He remembered leaving a spare set of clothes and a few old tools in the storage shed behind the building. If he could get there without being spotted, he might find something useful, maybe even money. Late that night, he made his way toward the familiar streets, staying close to the shadows. The town looked different now. It was quieter, tenser. Porch lights glowed brighter, doors were locked earlier, and the streets were almost empty. Everyone had heard the news. Willow Creek wasn't used to being the center of a manhunt, and fear had settled over it like fog. Daniel felt like an intruder in a place that used to be home. He reached the back of the garage just after midnight. The yard was empty, the windows dark. He moved slowly, listening for any sound. His hands trembled as he unlocked the shed door with a rusted key he'd kept on his keyring. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. He searched quietly through boxes and shelves until he found what he was looking for: a small bag containing some old clothes, a flashlight, and a few wrinkled bills. It wasn't much, but it felt like a lifeline. He allowed himself a moment of relief, leaning against the wall, breathing deeply. What Daniel didn't know was that the garage had recently been fitted with a motion-activated security camera. After the police discovered his connection to Mark, they had installed cameras in case Daniel tried to return. The moment he stepped inside the shed, the sensor clicked on. A small red light blinked silently in the corner, recording everything. Within minutes, the footage was flagged by a system connected to the local sheriff's office. Officers were dispatched immediately. Daniel had no idea. He slipped back out, clutching the bag, and moved through the alley toward a row of houses. But before he reached the end of the street, the distant sound of sirens froze him in place. He ducked behind a dumpster, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. The sirens grew louder, closer. Flashlights began to sweep across the yards. He could hear dogs barking and the crunch of boots on gravel. Panic took over. He darted between fences, cutting through backyards, knocking over trash bins as he ran. He was fast, but not fast enough. A helicopter's spotlight burst through the clouds, flooding the area with harsh white light. He tried to hide again, crouching low behind the same dumpster he had passed minutes earlier. As he caught his breath, he noticed something in the dirt beside him, a small plastic card half buried near his shoe. He picked it up, and his stomach dropped. It was his old work badge, the one with his photo, his name, and the name of his shop printed clearly on it. He had dropped it here weeks ago, back when he still believed he was untouchable. In that instant, everything hit him at once: the sirens, the light, the sound of officers shouting in the distance. The card slipped from his hand, and he felt the full weight of what he had done. There was no way out now, no clever plan to save him. For the first time, Daniel understood that he had crossed a line he could never return from. It was the moment he knew he had truly messed up. The arrest was quiet and quick. When the officers found Daniel crouched behind the dumpster, he didn't try to run again. He was too exhausted to move, too numb to fight. Mud streaked his face, his hands were shaking, and his clothes were torn from days of running. The floodlights surrounded him, and for a brief moment, he just stared into the brightness as if he couldn't believe it was finally over. The officers shouted commands, but Daniel barely heard them. He simply raised his hands and let them take him away. By the time morning came, the story had spread everywhere. The headline on the local news read, "Fugitive Mechanic Caught After 4-Day Manhunt." Reporters gathered outside the police station, their cameras flashing as officers led Daniel inside. To the town, it was the end of a mystery that had haunted them for months. To Daniel, it was the beginning of a new kind of punishment, the kind that didn't end with handcuffs. In the interrogation room, he sat in silence for hours. The detectives laid out the evidence one piece at a time: photos of stolen goods, the receipts found in his car, security footage from the garage. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't deny anything. When they finally asked why he did it, he hesitated before answering. His voice was quiet, almost flat. He said it started with one mistake, just one bad decision that got easier every time he repeated it. He said he hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that he only wanted to fix his problems before they got out of control. But the more he talked, the clearer it became that he had lost control long before the police ever found him. The confession took hours. He told them about the stash in his garage, the buyers he'd met in secret, and the long drives to the quarry where he had stolen goods. He admitted that part of him felt powerful, like he was winning some invisible game no one else could see. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, eyes down, as if the words had drained the last of his strength. The detectives exchanged a look, then quietly gathered their papers. They didn't need more. In the days that followed, the people of Willow Creek struggled to make sense of it all. Neighbors who once waved to Daniel as he drove by now locked their doors and turned away when they passed his house. His yellow home on Pine Street sat empty, its windows dark and the grass overgrown. For many, it became a reminder that danger doesn't always come from strangers, it can live right next door. Daniel's trial began 2 months later. The evidence was overwhelming, and the verdict came quickly. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for multiple counts of theft and obstruction. When the judge asked if he wanted to say anything before sentencing, Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the floor. Then he said softly that he wasn't afraid of prison. What scared him most was how easy it had been to throw everything away. After the trial, the story faded from the headlines, but Willow Creek never quite returned to normal. The people still spoke about Daniel from time to time, usually in low voices at the diner or after church, wondering how someone so ordinary could live a lie for so long. His name became a warning, a story parents told their children about choices and consequences. In prison, Daniel kept mostly to himself. He worked in the machine shop, followed the rules, and never caused trouble. Years passed quietly. Sometimes he thought about his small yellow house, the friendly waves from his neighbors, and the nights he spent believing he was smarter than everyone else. Those memories hurt the most. They reminded him that the life he ruined wasn't stolen from anyone, it was the one he had built with his own hands and lost the moment he chose to cross the line.